Welcome, everyone. Today we are going beyond the comfort zone, and we are absolutely talking shit with King-KAMBUF. We're diving into a document that's less a paper and more of a command.
It really is. We're looking at the KAMBUF National Building Design Command Brief, and specifically the mandate from December 1st, 2025.
That's the one. Energy sovereignty and distributed power commons for KAMBUF city-states and diaspora grids. It's a mouthful, but every word counts.
Every single word. And it's coming from the services of KING-KAMBUF PS Architecture Design Studios, which tells you right away this is about design. It's an explicit order to architects, to engineers, saying you are designing the physical infrastructure of self-determination.
That phrase, self-determination, is key. The focus is just crystal clear. They want to move beyond these fragile, centralized energy systems that we see failing all over the place.
And build what they call power commons, self-reliant, resilient. It's a total paradigm shift.
So that's the mission statement right there. When they say power commons, what are we talking about, really?
We're talking about locally governed energy. So think solar mini-grids, microgrids that can power a whole neighborhood, specialized agro-energy hubs. It's about moving ownership and control down to the community level.
A rapid shift in scale, from one massive national utility to hundreds of smaller local assets.
And the reason the rationale for this is laid out so bluntly in the source material. It basically says that for Africa to achieve universal energy access, it can't just copy the 20th century model.
You be building huge coal or gas plants?
Exactly. That model of massive plants feeding these brittle, sprawling grids, it just hasn't worked. It's consistently failed to reach everyone. So the only way forward, they argue, is this rapid scaling of decentralized renewables, mini-grids, off-grid solutions, getting power to where it's never been before.
But what gives this brief its weight, its gravity, is the philosophy behind it. King-KAMBUF's language is so powerful.
Oh, it is. There's a direct quote in here that just stopped me in my tracks. It says, "Energy is not just a utility, it is governance, dignity, and nationhood."
Wow. Okay. So that reframes everything. Electricity isn't just something you buy. It's a pillar of your political and economic freedom.
It elevates the whole thing from an engineering problem to a political act. I mean, think about it. If your nation can't guarantee power for its hospitals, for its markets, for its schools, is it truly sovereign?
Right. Its sovereignty is fundamentally compromised.
So by distributing the power, the physical power, and the ownership, you're distributing resilience. You're distributing democratic control. You're cementing self-reliance from the ground up.
So for our deep dive today, we're going to zero in on the brief's rotating master challenge focus, which is community co-design.
And this is so important. We're not just looking at the technical specs, the kilowatts and the wiring diagrams.
No, we're dissecting how KMBUF is ordering them to design the social contract itself, to make sure the hardware and the community governance are, well, inseparable.
That's the real challenge for the designers, isn't it? How do you actually embed social justice, affordability, and democratic control into the physical layout of a solar plaza or a battery enclosure? It's a whole new way of thinking about design.
Let's start with that design philosophy. I mean, it's clearly a reaction against something. It's born from the failure of these big, centralized, state-run energy monopolies.
Oh, 100%. The critique is baked right in. These old systems are they're too capital-intensive, they're slow to adapt, and their fragility is a systemic risk to the entire economy.
And they provide the perfect, painful example of that, right? The South African load-shedding crisis.
It's the poster child for centralized failure. It's cited directly in the precedents. It's a real-world, ongoing case study of what happens when centralized governance fails, when you have underinvestment, corruption, bad maintenance.
The whole system just grinds to a halt. The entire economy suffers because there's this single point of failure.
Exactly. So the vulnerability is just inherent in that model.
So the answer isn't just to swap a coal plant for a solar farm at the central level. It's to decentralize everything, the agency, the ownership, the power itself.
Which brings us right to the co-design mandate. This is a list of 5 non-negotiable requirements for every single project, and these go way beyond your typical technical checklist.
Okay, so what's number 1?
Number 1 is the foundation for everything, community governance of energy assets. It specifies that ownership has to be with local groups. So co-ops, community trusts, maybe a decentralized municipal utility.
So it's legally preventing some big external corporation or even the central state from just owning everything.
Precisely. It keeps control local. And that flows directly into the second point, which is hugely important: tariff justice and affordability.
This is massive for the listener, because you can have all the power in the world, but if people can't afford it, it's useless. Energy poverty is about price, not just access.
It is. So the mandate forces the design to ensure the clean energy is priced justly. This means low-income communities have to get a real economic benefit and be protected from, predatory pricing, which is a super common failure point when you privatize energy.
Right, so the system has to pay for itself, but it can't do it on the backs of the poorest people. It has to be cheaper than the alternative, like dangerous kerosene or expensive diesel.
Yes. Then the third and fourth requirements are all about building local capacity and equity. So number 3 is the inclusion of women and youth in decision-making.
And number 4 is establishing training pipelines from local schools into energy careers.
These two go hand in hand. The logic is simple. If the energy system is built locally, it has to be maintained locally by local people.
That's not just about fairness, is it?
Yeah.
It's about resilience.
Yeah.
If you have to fly in an engineer from the capital every time a single inverter fails, your system is not sustainable.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So training local youth and making a point to include women in both the technical and the governance roles, that ensures this transition actually builds lasting local prosperity. It's not just a construction project.
Okay, and the 5th one is, this is the one that really gets interesting from an architectural standpoint. It's the design of public spaces around energy infrastructure.
This is my favorite part. We're talking about solar plazas, energy courts, charging hubs. The power source is explicitly ordered to be a visible, functional part of public life.
So you're taking something that's normally hidden, locked behind a fence with razor wire, and making it a civic asset, something that people can see and touch and own.
And that visibility, as the brief argues, is what builds collective stewardship. It builds pride. The challenge for the designer becomes truly interdisciplinary. You're juggling technical demands with legal, social, and aesthetic ones all at once.
So how do they make sure this actually happens? That it's not just, nice words on a page?
Yep. Through the required deliverables. They are incredibly rigorous. They are not accepting some vague conceptual sketch. They demand detailed system diagrams, site analysis. They want to see large-scale corridor diagrams down to a 1.10,000 Ziegler scale and specific architectural plans at 1.500.
That level of detail is a form of accountability.
It is. The output has to include structural details for PV mounts, for shade structures, for these tough, vandal-resistant battery enclosures. But here's the kicker, the part that really changes the game for the architects.
What's that?
The drawings have to be annotated with 2 sets of labels.
2 sets?
Yes, that's the most innovative instruction in the whole brief. First, you have the technical labels, structural spans, materials, conduits, the kiloW output, the stuff the builder needs.
Okay, standard stuff.
But right alongside those, you must include governance labels. Things like co-op administration office, community meeting court, tariff payment kiosk, youth training bay.
Wow. So the designer's job is fundamentally different. You're not just designing a machine. You are legally defining social space on the drawing itself.
Exactly. So where you put the battery enclosure isn't just an engineering decision about cooling. It becomes a social decision about visibility, access, and community ownership. It's all connected.
And they even have to design public communication tasks, like a storyboard for an explainer video. So the final product has to be technically sound and socially legible.
It's designing the full stack, the flow of electrons, the flow of money, and the flow of information, all at the same time.
Okay, so let's get into the specific schemes. We'll start with the really intense urban and commercial challenges, kicking off with Scheme 1. This one is taking us right into the economic heart of West Africa.
That's right. We're in Nigeria, the Lagos-Ogun corridor, and the focus is on solar mini-grids and market power commons.
And the context here says everything. The source material calls it diesel generator chaos. And anyone who's been to a market in Lagos knows exactly what that means.
It's not an exaggeration. It's the soundtrack of commerce. You have these huge informal markets, dense industrial zones, and every single shop, every small factory is running its own noisy, polluting diesel generator.
Because the main grid is either completely unreliable or just doesn't exist in that spot.
Right. So you have this huge technical problem. The noise, the pollution, the absolutely staggering cost for businesses to operate. And the design challenge is to replace all of that with a community-owned modular mini-grid network.
And that network has to be strong enough for commercial businesses, but also power things like schools and clinics that are part of the market ecosystem.
And resilience is the name of the game. The technical mandate demands that the system can go into island mode instantly.
Let's break that down for the listener. What does island mode mean here?
So, Nigeria's national grid is notoriously unstable. It can collapse regionally or even nationally. If that huge, brittle grid goes down, the market's local power system has to be smart enough to instantly disconnect itself, to isolate, and just keep running on its own solar and battery power.
So it protects the local businesses. It prevents a national failure from becoming a local catastrophe for a clinic that needs power.
Precisely. And another key design requirement is creating safe night economies. The lighting from this power commons needs to extend the trading days safely, which is huge for security, especially for women vendors, and lets commerce thrive after dark.
And how do they actually build this? What's the implementation model?
It's a pretty sophisticated financial blend. They're using results-based financing, so funding is tied to hitting connection targets and proving the system is resilient. But that's combined with a legal requirement for genuine community equity and ownership from day one.
And the workforce has to be local, right? I remember that from the mandate.
Yes. Youth technicians trained for maintenance, and critically women's market associations have to be in the primary governance roles. They're the main users, so they must be the owners.
It makes perfect sense. The precedent studies mentioned here really drive this home, don't they? The history of Nigeria's grid shows why this distributed model isn't a luxury.
It's an economic imperative. Centralization has repeatedly failed to support these massive economic hubs. This is the only way forward.
Okay, let's move west now. Scheme 2 takes on one of the toughest urban challenges anywhere in the world. We're in Kenya, in Nairobi, looking at the informal settlements, places like Kibera and Mathare.
Right. Slum upgrade energy and public realm microgrids. And here, the challenge is less about raw megawatts and much more about spatial and social justice.
The core mission is to deliver safe, legal electricity and good public lighting, but without the old destructive approach.
Exactly. No clear and replace. You're not bulldozing communities to build a new grid. The energy upgrade has to preserve and enhance the urban fabric that's already there, the livelihoods that are already there.
So how do you do that? The space is so constrained.
You have to integrate the power and light directly into what exists. We're talking about running conduits along public steps, down narrow lanes, into courtyards. You're transforming zones that were previously dark and dangerous into safe, lit community spaces.
And the centerpiece is this idea of the energy court.
The energy court, yeah. It's a kind of central hub, a well-lit, safe public space with reliable lighting, maybe communal Wi-Fi, and secure stations where people can charge their phones and devices.
And the metrics for success here aren't technical, they're social.
Deeply social. They're tracking the percentage of informal connections regularized. That means how many people you move off of those dangerous illegal wiretaps and onto a safe, legal microgrid. And they're also tracking measurable indicators of nighttime safety.
The implementation for this focuses on local training, right?
Yeah.
The neighborhood line stewards.
Yes, through community design labs. These stewards are trusted local residents who are trained to do minor maintenance, monitor the system, and help manage the community co-op. It builds trust and helps minimize things like theft.
And this brings us back to tariff justice. The brief is clear that if the new legal power is too expensive,
people will be forced back to the unsafe, illegal connections. The economics of poverty will win. It defeats the whole purpose. So the design has to be economically sustainable for the absolute poorest residents from the very beginning.
Okay, now for a completely different scale. Scheme 3 takes us to productive use, to industry. We're in Ghana, the Akotema corridor, for an industrial park solar plus apprenticeship campus.
Right. This is about taking large-scale renewable generation and marrying it directly to human capital development. The idea is to look at a huge industrial park, all those massive roofs, the parking lots, the open yards, and see it as one giant collective solar field.
Providing reliable, clean power for all the businesses in the park.
Yes, but here's the KAMBUF twist. It's about making that power visible and aspirational. They're embedding an energy apprenticeship campus right inside the industrial park.
A living laboratory.
A living laboratory, where KAMBU youth get trained in design, installation, operation, maintenance, all on the very systems that are powering Ghana's economy right next door.
So the required drawings would reflect that. You'd have to design the campus as well as the solar field.
Both. You have to show the whole solar massing for the park, but also the detailed architectural plan for the apprenticeship campus. They even get down to the detail of designing a specific steel carport canopy module that has to be multifunctional.
What does that mean, multifunctional?
It has to hold the PV panels, obviously, but it also has to provide shade and have an integrated system for rainwater harvesting. Every element has to do more than one job.
The cautionary note here is really important. It warns that industrial solar can't just be a private cost-saving measure for the rich companies inside the park.
That is the danger. If you ignore the community benefit, the training, the local jobs, you just create what are essentially energy enclaves. You protect the wealthy and entrench energy inequality. This design mandate forbids that.
Let's wrap this section by going back to the crisis zone. South Africa, Scheme 6. Township Just Transition Energy Commons near Johannesburg.
The mandate here is it's defensive, it's restorative. With the national load shedding crisis as the backdrop, the goal is to create these energy commons using rooftop solar and centralized community batteries.
They're acting as power shields, basically, protecting residents from the national blackouts and from crazy high tariffs.
And it's explicitly linked to the just transition, the move away from South Africa's coal-dependent economy. So the designs have to think about retooling human capital, not just electrical systems.
The key design piece they focus on is the community battery plaza plan.
Right. Again, the battery enclosure isn't just a concrete box. It has to be integrated into public life. The brief calls for vandal-resistant enclosures that double as public seating or shade structures or charging nodes. The infrastructure has to serve the community in more ways than one.
And the metrics are all about improving daily life. You're tracking the hours of autonomous backup they get each day and the community tariff savings. Real, tangible benefits.
And the implementation strategy links this directly to skills retraining. You're moving workers from the old coal economy into renewable installation and maintenance. It's about flipping the power dynamic.
Instead of being passive victims of a failing utility,
residents become active co-owners of their own resilience, using their own microsystems to protect themselves from a massive systemic governance failure. It's a powerful model.
Okay, now let's shift our focus a bit. We're moving into rural upliftment and the really tricky governance structures you need to make these projects fair and lasting. Scheme 4 takes us to Ethiopia in the Addis Ababa highlands for agro-solar irrigation and grain milling commons.
This is a classic productive use case for agriculture. The design challenge is to create these multi-use hubs that provide clean energy for all the essentials.
So pumping water for irrigation,
powering grain mills, running cold storage to keep produce from spoiling, and even powering digital training centers, all from one solar hub.
The technical challenge of integrating all that is high, but the brief says the real core challenge is something else. It's preventing elite capture of the energy assets.
This is the single biggest risk in rural development projects all over the world. It has to be designed against.
What does that mean, elite capture?
It means that if you just build the asset and hand it over, the most powerful or wealthiest figures in the community often monopolize it. They'll take over the grain mill or the irrigation pump and then charge everyone else exorbitant fees, which completely negates the community benefit.
So it's a social design problem. How does the mandate solve it?
Through the financial model. It specifies a pay-as-you-grow tariff that's linked directly to the harvest or the income generated. So farmers pay for the energy service after they've sold their crops. It ties affordability directly to their ability to pay.
Which makes it much harder for a wealthy intermediary to use high upfront costs to exclude everyone else.
Exactly. And the deliverables require these big regional diagrams showing the co-ops, the hub, the water sources, and again, detailed plans for things like a PV-covered shade roof over the milling and market floor, always multifunctional.
The precedent lesson here is a big warning, isn't it, about donor-funded projects?
It's a huge warning. So many past projects have failed, not because the tech was bad, but because nobody funded long-term operation and maintenance. The KMBUF design must earmark a portion of the revenue from milling and irrigation for a dedicated maintenance fund to guarantee it lasts for decades.
Okay, let's move to Scheme 5, which pushes the social justice agenda even further. We're in Senegal, in the Dakar suburbs, for a social housing microgrid and women's energy co-op. This one explicitly links energy to gender equity.
This is a profound social innovation. The mandate is absolute. The microgrid must be run by a women-led energy co-op.
And it goes further than that, right? The revenue it generates.
The revenue doesn't just go back to some far-off investor. Its use is embedded in the community. It has to be used to support local social services funding, childcare, a health clinic, maybe literacy programs for adults.
That completely changes the purpose of a utility. It stops being just a transaction and becomes a direct funding engine for community well-being.
It does. And the design of the housing itself has to reflect that shared philosophy. Shared solar on the roofs, efficient community kitchens, shared laundries, all integrated into the housing blocks and courtyards.
And you can actually measure the success of a social shift like that. The metrics are things like childcare slots funded by the energy surplus.
And the specific share of women in governance and technical roles. And there's a strong success analog for this. Globally, women-led energy co-ops just perform better. They have better repayment rates, lower technical losses, and they're better at distributing the social benefits fairly.
The cautionary note warns against just building standard social housing that ignores energy efficiency.
Because that just traps low-income residents in a cycle of high utility bills. This design ensures the housing itself is a productive asset that generates capital for the community.
Okay, Scheme 7 introduces a much bigger scale. The idea of trans-regional covenants. This is in Morocco, with Tanger Med and inland villages, designing port-linked wind solar for rural electrification.
This one is tackling a really complex policy problem that they call enclave renewables.
Well, it's enclave renewable.
So Morocco is a huge hub for large-scale renewables. Massive wind and solar farms, often built near big industrial zones and ports like Tanger Med, but they're often optimized just for industry or, for export to Europe.
So the risk is that all that clean power, all that wealth generation, just bypasses the local Moroccan population, especially in more remote, marginalized areas.
Right. So the brief mandates the design of a covenant, a governance model that guarantees a specific share of the power and the revenue from those huge industrial farms is earmarked for developing mini-grids in the inland Berber and other rural villages.
So you're designing a mechanism for wealth redistribution baked into the energy contract.
You're designing politics and economics. The implementation uses PPAs or power purchase agreements. These are the long-term contracts for buying electricity. But the KMBUF PPA must have embedded community benefit agreements built right in.
And a trust fund.
And a dedicated trust fund, financed by the PPA revenue, that's specifically for long-term maintenance and scholarships for those rural communities. It connects the big national project to direct local benefit.
So the drawing for this would be a massive regional diagram showing the port and then these little village nodes inland.
Exactly, at a 1,100,000 scale. It forces the designer to hold both the massive industrial scale and the intimate human scale in their mind at the same time. The warning from history is clear. Big projects that don't share benefits with locals always face resistance and delays. This is designing justice from the start to ensure success.
Now, the KMBO vision really goes global. It leaps across the Atlantic, physically binding the African continent with its diaspora through shared energy infrastructure. Schemes 8, 9, and 10 are all about this global reach.
And we start with Scheme 8, right in the cultural heart of the Afro-diaspora, Brazil, specifically Salvador Bahia for an Afro-diaspora solar cultural plaza.
This is maybe the most symbolic project of them all, a fusion of cultural identity and hard infrastructure.
It has to be. Salvador's connection to the African continent is the deepest in the Americas. So the mandate is to literally fuse cultural ritual with energy infrastructure in a single, visible public space.
The design elements are all about civic and cultural life. Things like PV-shaded performance stages, so cultural events have reliable, clean power.
Lit murals that honor KMBUF and historical diaspora figures. Public charging benches, and a microgrid that's specifically designed to support not just cultural events, but the local vendors who need affordable power to run their businesses.
So the energy system becomes an act of cultural recognition.
And economic support. Even the design of the shade structures has to reflect local cultural forms while still maximizing the solar capture. The public communication task for this one is amazing. It's titled, KAMBUF Bahia, the Sun Remembers.
What's the biggest risk in a project that's so dependent on culture and symbolism?
The cautionary analog is crystal clear, and it's vital for making this last. The project must treat its cultural partners as co-owners, with real governance authority, not just as decoration or passive recipients.
If you don't embed that co-ownership,
you get resentment, neglect, and the whole thing falls apart. Real stewardship only comes from real authority.
So this plaza becomes a resilient anchor for diaspora identity, linking power to heritage.
And that link takes us straight to Scheme 9 in the USA. We're in Atlanta, designing a diaspora business district microgrid and training tower. This is the flagship concept for economic empowerment and skill transfer.
Atlanta makes perfect sense. It's such a critical hub for the African diaspora in the U.S., with so many Black-owned businesses and HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities.
So the concept has two functions. First, A reliable, resilient microgrid to power a corridor of African diaspora businesses. And second, an integrated, highly visible training tower.
And this tower has a global purpose.
An explicit global purpose. It's designed to train technicians not just for Atlanta, but to be a pipeline, to feed trained engineers and maintenance specialists for KMUF projects back in Africa and the Caribbean. A formal, two-way skills exchange across the Atlantic.
And visibility is key again. The architecture has to shout this mission.
Right. The tower has to have facade-integrated PV and a transparent mechanical floor, so the batteries, the inverters, the control systems are all on public display. The tech is showcased as a symbol of aspiration and expertise.
But there's a huge cautionary warning here. When you develop a high-tech district in a valuable urban area,
The brief is explicit. You must guard against green gentrification and displacement. This is the classic pattern. Property values soar, and you push out the very residents and businesses the project was supposed to help.
so this energy project needs legally enforceable community benefits agreements to prevent that displacement.
It's non-negotiable. The innovation must benefit the existing population, not displace it.
Finally, Scheme 10 takes on the highest stakes of all. Climate resilience in the Caribbean. We're looking at Barbados and St. Lucia, and a hurricane-resilient solar battery schools network.
This one is literally a matter of life and death. The region is just so vulnerable to climate disasters. So the core challenge is designing schools to be resilient power islands. They call them energy-safe schools.
They need to be able to function on their own when the main grid inevitably fails during a hurricane.
And they have to be multifunctional. So, yes, a school, but also a hurricane shelter, a microgrid anchor for the neighborhood, a water storage point, a communications hub, and a KAMBUF diaspora hub.
The technical specs must be incredibly robust.
Absolutely. We're talking hardened roofs that can withstand Category 5 winds with fully integrated solar, battery rooms elevated above flood levels, and specialized island mode switchgear that lets them disconnect and run autonomously for days on end.
And this has to be co-designed with local PTAs and youth groups.
To ensure it's accepted and cared for, the metrics are all about emergency readiness. The days of autonomous operation you can achieve, and the amount of expensive polluting diesel you avoid using.
The success analog is clear. Schools are always used as community hubs after a disaster.
So by turning them into permanent power islands, the investment does double duty. It supports education every day, and it saves lives every year. It's about building permanent, self-sufficient, renewable solutions instead of just relying on temporary diesel generators after the fact.
These three diaspora schemes really show the global reach of KAMBUF, binding culture, economics, and climate adaptation across the world through this distributed power commons.
So we've gone through 10 schemes. I mean, from the dense markets of Lagos to the highlands of Ethiopia to the Caribbean islands, the thing that binds them all is the incredible detail required in the action instructions.
Yeah, the final output they're demanding it's more than just standard architecture. We have to come back to this idea of the drawing as a covenant.
Yes. For the final deliverables, they require not just a plan and a section, but one key detail drawing, a 1.20 scale drawing of the battery enclosure, for example.
And that single drawing has to tell the whole story. It has to embody this integrated design philosophy.
It has to have both sets of labels we talked about. The technical labels, the kilowatt capacity, the structural spans, the stuff for the builder.
And then the governance labels, co-op entrance, community meeting court, public tariff board, the stuff for the community. This is where the drawing becomes a social and legal document.
It forces the architect to admit that their technical decisions have immediate, binding social consequences. It's about access, ownership, maintenance. The drawing becomes a literal, visible manifestation of the covenant.
An agreement between the engineer and the community on how this thing will work and be cared for years to come.
The brief pulls this all together by looking at the precedent studies. It extracts these universal lessons from what's worked and what hasn't, globally. So when you look across all of them, what are the themes that predict success?
It's remarkably consistent. Success is never just about the tech. It always requires robust community participation in the design and the governance.
It always requires guaranteed long-term funding for maintenance so you avoid that donor-driven failure cycle. And it requires those embedded benefit agreements, like the covenant in Morocco. And it absolutely requires tackling affordability alongside electrification.
And on the flip side, the failures are just as consistent.
Inevitably. Failure comes from top-down approaches that ignore local knowledge, from neglecting maintenance funds, and from designing systems that in the end, just entrench inequality, either through high tariffs or elite capture.
So what does this all boil down to for KAMBUF's high-level policy? The lessons learned in the metadata fields are so perfect. The first one is the big economic mandate. Tariff justice is as important as kilowatts.
And that phrase should be echoing everywhere. An unaffordable kilowatt is an inaccessible kilowatt. It doesn't matter how cleanly you generated it. If the economics shut out the poor, the system has failed its dignity mandate.
And the second lesson ties it all back to the architecture. Visible public energy infrastructure builds pride and stewardship.
If the power source is hidden away, owned by some faceless entity, it's just a utility. But if it powers the plaza where your kids play, if the battery room is on display in the training tower, if the solar array shades the market where you work,
And you know you own a piece of it.
it becomes a civic symbol, a source of identity, a demonstration of sovereign capability. That visibility is the resilient infrastructure. It's the political wiring that ensures justice is built in from the ground up.
This has been just an incredible look at how infrastructure can be redefined. Redefined as a vehicle for social and economic sovereignty. We have to close by revisiting the gravity of KING-KAMBUF's final directive.
Yes. The closing statement just summarizes the whole effort. It's so potent. It says, energy is not charity. Energy is command.
That's a definitive statement of agency. Command implies strategic self-determination. It's a rejection of dependence.
It is. And the brief continues, it's a call to action. We design and claim power commons that light our homes, feed our markets, drive our data, and train our children into the engineers of a sovereign future.
They're not waiting for permission. They're not waiting for rescue. They're designing their future right now.
And that final, beautiful synthesis, that the drawings themselves are more than blueprints. They are, in the words of the brief, covenants between roof and market, village and port, Africa and her diaspora,
Binding physical agreements.
building the node, securing the community, and expanding the grid of KMBUF. That's the mission. And so as we reflect on this mandate to put a battery room in a public plaza, to turn a solar canopy into a cultural stage, it raises a final, really important thought for you, the listener.
Go on.
If these designs actually work, if they're successful, how will this physical integration of the energy commons fundamentally change how residents perceive governance and community ownership? How does moving energy from being this hidden, unreliable utility to being a visible, co-owned source of power? How does that transform a community's political identity into a source of tangible nationhood and pride?
That shift in perception from being a passive consumer to an empowered co-owner. That might just be the most profound and the most resilient piece of infrastructure they build. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of energy sovereignty. We hope it makes you think about how these ideas of community co-design could apply to the infrastructure challenges right where you live.